when narcissists collide. Part 2. What then is the dynamic when a lesser narcissist and a mid-range narcissist become entangled with one another? Briefly, the lesser is categorized by a lower level of cognitive function, low control threshold on the ignited fury, reduced levels of charm, a narrower stable of manipulations, an often chaotic life in terms of relationships, work, addictions, and finance, and a greater propensity for physical violence. The mid-range narcissist is passive-aggressive, with increased charm and cognitive function compared to the lesser, less likely to use physical force, but instead rely on silence treatments and sulking, makes use of pity plays and seeks sympathy, turns to others for assistance in manipulating individuals, and has a wider range of manipulations to rely on. Again, neither of these individuals knows what they are, nor do they recognize their kind. How do these two types of narcissist interact with one another? As an overarching philosophy, the interaction of the lesser and the mid-ranger is one of cat and mouse. Both are in the fight for fuel, but have different tools to hand to achieve this. The lesser will be the agent provocateur, with the mid-ranger playing the hard-done-to individual, although he or she will unleash their passive-aggressive manipulations as they fight for fuel. Within the familial narcissistic dynamic, there is no seduction between the two as a consequence of the two individuals being brought together by reason of being related. Let us take the example of two adult sisters. The lesser will look to draw fuel from the mid-range narcissist by competing. The lesser is likely to be jealous of the mid-range, who may well be perceived as more accomplished and successful in terms of job, quality of home, social circle, and such like. The lesser will regard this success as an inherent criticism of the lesser, which will ignite her fury. She cannot help but lash out at her sister, and will do so by accusing her of having her nose stuck in the air, being Lady Muck, suggesting her achievements are not her own, but those of other people, and so forth. Anything in order to achieve the upper hand in the dynamic between the two. The aggression exhibited by the lesser sister towards the mid-range sister will provide the mid-range sister with fuel, but the nature of the challenge that is contained within it will mean that she will also look to draw fuel from other people by way of pity play and seeking sympathy. Thus, one can expect in the context of, say, a family gathering, the lesser will feel the need to verbally attack the mid-ranger, often with ad hominem insults such as, "You've put on more weight since the last time I saw you," or "I have a dress like that, it does not suit me either." If the lesser makes these comments in an angry or savage fashion, the mid-ranger gains fuel. If the lesser, which is far less likely, states them in a fuel-free way, then this will wound the mid-ranger, who will either retreat from the lesser with a silent treatment and or seek sympathy fuel from non-narcissist third parties. The mid-ranger's hurt response will provide fuel to the lesser. Thus, when the mid-ranger bleats, "Why are you always picking on me?" or "Leave me alone, why do you have to be so hateful?" the lesser gains fuel. Should the mid-ranger respond with a silent treatment, then this does not provide the lesser sister with fuel, so she will pursue the mid-ranger, trying to break the silent treatment. This pursuit is likely to give the mid-ranger more fuel, as the lesser sister becomes more and more annoyed and frustrated by the silence. The mid-range will maintain the silent treatment until she receives sufficient fuel to heal the wound, and will then speak again. Or the lesser, deprived of fuel and furious because of the criticism which arises from silence, is forced to seek fuel elsewhere. If the two sisters are in isolation, any interaction will soon descend into an argument, and the mid-ranger implementing a silent treatment in order to defend herself. The lesser will keep goading the mid-ranger until she provides fuel again, or the lesser will break off and storm away to lash out at somebody else, cursing the baby-like behavior of her sister as she has her own temper tantrum. If the two sisters are with other family members, the mid-ranger will first turn to them for sympathy and help in halting the attack of the lesser. This is likely to descend into allegation, counter-allegation, and all manner of manipulation, as there is triangulation, blame-shifting, projection, and such like on an industrial scale. Either the mid-ranger will sit and sulk in silence or slink away, with the lesser continuing to goad. If this provoking behaviour does not yield results, then the lesser sister will turn to the other members of the family for the fuel that ought to have been provided by the mid-range sister. When the two narcissists are friends, an interesting dynamic will occur. The lesser will see the more successful mid-ranger as not only a fuel source, but also someone who can provide residual benefits and character traits. Thus, the lesser will be keen to seduce the mid-ranger as an inner circle friend. The mid-ranger will see the aggression of the lesser as useful in terms of securing this person as a lieutenant, and will aim to seduce the lesser to become an inner circle friend who is then used for the purposes of carrying out the dirty work of the mid-ranger. The lesser, once having seduced the mid-ranger, will look to use the passive mid-ranger for the purposes of borrowing money, being available when nobody else might be to go out, and generally extort the mid-ranger's assets. The mid-ranger will comply initially as part of his or her own seduction of the lesser. It is when the mid-ranger expects to cash in on their generosity that the problems begin. The mid-ranger will seek to manipulate the lesser to do things for him or her. The lesser may do so at first, but after a while, his sense of entitlement means that he expects to be given things by the mid-ranger and need not do anything in return. He will reject this attempt at control and do so in a manner which will give the mid-ranger fuel. The mid-ranger, pushed by his own sense of entitlement, expects the lesser to carry out his wishes, based on past favours, and will react in a feigned, hurtful manner to the lesser lashing out. With both expecting the other to do something based on either entitlement and or past investment, and not gaining the required response, there will be a clash. The lesser will demand, and the mid-range will back off. The likely withdrawal of the mid-ranger will cause the lesser to break off in a fury and cause a temporary cessation of the connection as he seeks out other friends to give him what he is entitled to, non-narcissistic ones. The mid-ranger, hurt by this betrayal of friendship, will retreat and bemoan the selfishness of the lesser to anybody who will listen. They will, however, not discard one another, because they perceive a useful need in one another. The lesser sees the more successful mid-ranger as a provider of bounty to which he is entitled. The mid-ranger sees the lesser as a useful blunt instrument lieutenant, one to which he is also entitled. Unfortunately for them, their sense of entitlement will lead to them clashing, not bothering with one another after a flare-up, and then seeking one another out again, drawn by the lure of usefulness to one another. Of course, there is fuel to be gathered into the bargain, but it is not as extensive as when dealing with an empathic individual. Therefore, it is actually the residual benefits and character traits that are the main draw between the lesser and the mid-range narcissist in a social setting. Third parties will be dragged into their fallings out. The lesser will name-call the mid-range and attack verbally any other party who stands up for the mid-ranger. The mid-ranger will play the hard-done-to party to anybody who will listen and will manipulate them into trying to build a bridge, again, with the annoyed lesser. What about the situation where a lesser and a mid-range narcissist are drawn together through work? Again, this is a non-intimate scenario where there is a pre-existing connection between the two narcissists. Similar to the social setting described above, the two narcissists will be looking to the other for fuel, but, moreover, the sequestration of residual benefits. The lesser will expect the mid-ranger to be doing him favours, such as lessening his workload, supporting him for a promotion or a pay rise, doling out favourable work and such like, since the mid-ranger is likely to hold a slightly superior position. The mid-ranger will expect to lord it over the lesser and have him or her at the mid-ranger's beck and call. Thus, the lesser will regard any failure of the mid-ranger to show him or her favouritism as a criticism. The lesser's fury will be ignited, and, unable to keep it under control, he will lash out at the mid-ranger and others, causing disruption and potentially disciplinary reaction as the hurt mid-ranger goes running to HR. If the lesser holds the superior role in the workplace, then he will expect the mid-ranger to be his lackey. He will delegate considerable amounts of work to the mid-ranger, who will consider himself being picked on and singled out. He will not dare to complain direct to the lesser, but instead will gossip to peers, complain to a different boss, and potentially raise matters via a grievance. The lesser demands subservience from the mid-range narcissist as part of this deal of control and omnipotence. The mid-ranger, considering himself above menial activity and accountability, believes he is entitled to highlight the mean and unfair behavior of the lesser narcissist. The two will continue to churn out fuel for one another, with the lesser scathing attacks against the mid-ranger for daring to defy him, and with the mid-ranger responding by pleading with the lesser to leave him alone, or asking why he insists on making his life a misery. The two of them will certainly provide something of a show to other employees, whilst causing consternation to those who have to work alongside them or regulate their behaviours. They will effectively fight with one another, blaming and counter-blaming, neither ever being at fault and it always being the fault of the other. In terms of tertiary source reaction, a mid-ranger is mainly likely to be pleasant to a lesser tertiary source and provide positive fuel, which the lesser will accept. A lesser, however, is more likely to be aggressive towards a mid-ranger, or offend their readily offended sense of importance by pointing out that the mid-ranger tertiary source has done something wrong, which will result in the imposition of the withdrawal of services, which will in turn cause a sudden explosion from the lesser. Any interaction will be short-lived and will either be the provision of positive fuel, mid-ranger to lesser, or a burst of negative fuel, lesser to mid-ranger. Finally, what is the dynamic between a lesser narcissist and a mid-range narcissist in the context of a romantic relationship? The lesser, being the least cognitively able, may well seek to seduce a mid-range narcissist. The mid-range will evidence some charm towards the lesser, which will certainly appeal to the lesser, who will press the seduction in order to try and secure the mid-ranger as an intimate partner primary source. The mid-ranger, however, is likely to regard the lesser as not fulfilling the requisite empathic traits. Whilst the mid-ranger is not aware of specifically what he or she wants, he does have an instinctive awareness of the traits in a prospective romantic partner, which makes him feel better. These will be absent in the lesser, because not only are the empathic traits absent, the lesser lacks the cunning and guile, and the energy and inclination to feign them to the degree which would satisfy the mid-ranger. Thus, unless the mid-ranger is desperate for a primary source, he or she is unlikely to complete the seduction of a lesser as an intimate partner primary source. The mid-ranger will look elsewhere and reject the overtures of the lesser, deeming them not to tick the right boxes. The lesser will not try to press the seduction, since this rejection by the mid-ranger will cause his fury to ignite as a consequence of the low control threshold. He will lash out at the mid-ranger and be forced to find a different primary source instead, rather than selecting another narcissist. Thus, in most cases, the lesser will flare up as his seduction is derailed, and the mid-ranger will train his or her sights elsewhere. Even if the lesser is in desperate straits to secure a primary source, he will not be able to ensnare the mid-ranger, who will find his or her own needs unmet. However, if the mid-ranger is the party which is desperate to find a primary source, they may settle for the lesser in such circumstances. Of course, the lesser will be content for this to happen, the increased level of charm and complementary behavior of the mid-ranger satisfying, at least to begin with, the lesser's need for fuel. There are also likely to be character traits and residual benefits which will suit the needs of the lesser. Thus, if the lesser is the desperate party, but the mid-ranger is not, then the lesser will be denied. If the mid-ranger is the desperate party, and the lesser is or is not, then it is more likely that the two will form a romantic couple, securing the other as IPPS. In this scenario, the absence of sufficient positive fuel provision will soon surface. The bronze period behavior of the lesser will not suit the mid-range at all for his fuel needs. The selfishness and self-centeredness of the mid-ranger will not suit the lesser, and therefore devaluation will soon follow after seduction. However, this is where an interesting dynamic will occur, because it is actually in devaluation that the pair will meet one another's needs for fuel far longer than they did in seduction. The lesser, disappointed and indeed infuriated with the mid-ranger's poor positive fuel provision, will commence the devaluation. Being on the attack, her angry words, her fury, her nastiness will all be excellent fuel to the mid-ranger. He, of course, will not welcome the challenges made to him by the pointing finger of the lesser, but he cannot resist the tasty fuel which accompanies it. He will lap up the fuel provided by her, whilst responding with his own manipulations to keep the fuel flowing. He will blame shift, deny and deflect, and refuse to cooperate. He will roll out the pity plays, beg with the lesser to stop the hurtful behaviour, and so forth. All of which will be excellent fuel to the lesser. So she will continue with the machinations. Back and forth they will go, cat playing with mouse, mouse evading cat, in a scenario which causes them to provide sufficient negative fuel to one another. The mid-ranger will turn to the third parties, as is his wont, pointing out the horrible behaviour of the lesser. Such actions will be perceived as criticism by the lesser, and she will respond by further nasty behaviours, and also seeking out a new primary source, since devaluation is well on foot. Should the lesser locate this potential new primary source, news of his behaviour will reach the mid-ranger, either from third parties or from the less than subtle lesser herself, and this will wound the mid-ranger. He will flounce off in a silent treatment and look to find his own replacement primary source. The lesser will not respond to the silent treatment, but instead focus on the new primary source. The mid-range, seeing that the silent treatment has had no effect, will establish contact again with the lesser. This appeals to the lesser, as she now believes she has the upper hand again, although the mid-ranger will believe that he has, because he has caused the lesser to engage again. Thus, they are brought together again for a brief respite period. Of course, neither will provide sufficient positive fuel during the respite period, and therefore the devaluation begins again. The death knell for the intimate relationship between the lesser and mid-range narcissist is when they both commence their search for a new primary source and find a suitable prospect. Up until that point, the negative fuel provided through devaluation is maintaining their required fuel levels because of the contrast, something, as you know, which is always required by our kind, between their respective styles, the aggressive lesser and the passive-aggressive mid-ranger. Thus, their devaluation can go on for some time, but once one or both of these narcissists turns their attention to a new primary source, then the end of the relationship will arrive promptly. Either one or both will ensnare a non-narcissist, and the fuel provision from this individual, as an empathic individual, will cause the narcissist to focus on that person and discard either the lesser or the mid-range narcissist they have erroneously installed as a primary source.